The first light of dawn crept across London, piercing the dense gray fog that lingered over the city like a watchful sentinel. The Thames shimmered faintly, reflecting a sky that threatened rain but held a fragile, brittle calm. Inside the grand corridors of Buckingham Palace, velvet curtains muffled the outside world, leaving only the faint echo of distant footsteps and the low hum of activity. Here, in rooms steeped in centuries of protocol and silent power, the quiet tension was palpable, though invisible to anyone not attuned to it. Before we begin today's royal update, I want to take a quick moment. Many of you watch these videos but haven't subscribed yet, and you don't want to miss the latest developments and fascinating stories from the world of royalty. Subscribing is completely free and keeps you up to date as everything unfolds. And while you're here, let us know, where are you watching from? Share it in the comments. It's wonderful to see viewers joining us from around the world. Prince William moved through these halls like a shadow among statues, every step precise, measured. His eyes were trained not on the obvious, the guards, the tapestries, the chandeliers, but on the subtle, almost imperceptible. A shift in posture, a glance held too long, a hesitation in speech. To the untrained eye, the palace seemed serene, orderly. To him, it was a chessboard, every piece in motion, some known, some hidden, and all waiting to be tested. Outside, the city stirred. Markets opened, ambassadors arrived, and the hum of commerce masked the tremors beneath. Yet even in the mundane rhythm of everyday life, anomalies began to surface. A courier delivered a package without signature. A private bank reported suspicious transfers flagged only by an algorithm William had commissioned months before. Whispers floated through social circles, carrying fragments of information that refused to coalesce but hinted at larger, unseen currents. William paused in a sunlit hall, his hand brushing the edge of a polished banister. A subtle unease had settled in his mind, a feeling that the world was holding its breath, that beneath the familiar patterns of diplomacy, finance, and media, a storm was gathering. The pieces were aligning, yet the shape of the threat remained obscured. Every instinct screamed that patience was required, that reaction without observation would invite disaster. In the shadows of these corridors, someone watched, not openly, but through intermediaries, encrypted messages, and eyes that could blend into any crowd. An observer, anonymous yet intimate in knowledge, catalogued movements and whispers with surgical precision. This unseen presence knew more than anyone else in the palace, or perhaps it was simply a mirror to William's own vigilance, a reflection of the forces that even he could not yet see. A subtle disturbance flickered on the edge of perception. A high-ranking aide, normally impeccable in manner, had hesitated before delivering a report. A diplomat in Brussels had overstepped in a minor negotiation, leaving traces of inconsistency. Nothing concrete, nothing that could be openly challenged, but enough to make the careful observer take note, to begin threading connections that might later reveal a tapestry of influence, manipulation, and betrayal. And then there were the documents, files delivered without explanation, their contents intentionally fragmented. A ledger missing key entries, a memo hinting at a meeting that may or may not have occurred. Each anomaly alone was trivial. Together, they formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. William examined them in private, tracing every line with the patience of a detective, aware that each overlooked detail could become the lever that upends the equilibrium of power. Yet life outside the palace continued in its deceptive normalcy. London buses rumbled over wet cobblestones. The smell of rain on asphalt mingled with the aroma of roasted coffee from street vendors. And while citizens went about their routines, a different game unfolded entirely unseen. Alliances tested in whispers, fortunes shifting in numbers invisible to the public eye. Influence exerted in ways that left no trace except in the minute reactions of those who noticed. The open loop of suspicion and anticipation tightened. William sensed that someone, or several someones, were probing, calculating, and waiting. The observer's presence became more evident in the anomalies that could not be explained away. And though the palace appeared still, a pulse ran beneath its marble floors, a pulse that hinted at disruption, confrontation, and secrets poised to explode. By mid-morning, William had assembled a quiet council of trusted aides. Their discussions were measured, indirect, full of coded language that concealed intention while signaling insight to those who needed to understand. Every phrase, every subtle gesture, conveyed more than the spoken word. They mapped contingencies, projected possibilities, and debated hypothetical outcomes with the intensity of generals planning for a battle that no one outside the inner circle could yet see. And yet the greatest tension lay not in what was known, but in what was not. Every unopened envelope, every untapped source of intelligence, every glimmer of rumor carried the potential to tip the scales. The palace seemed calm, the streets orderly, the city oblivious. But beneath it all, a quiet storm gathered, invisible yet inevitable. The fog over London had begun to thicken again, curling through narrow streets and over iron railings like fingers seeking purchase. Within the palace, the tension had deepened, invisible yet almost tangible, stretching each conversation into a web of implication and inference. William moved carefully, aware that every glance and every word could carry meaning far beyond what was spoken. Nothing was accidental here. Every hesitation, every small act, became part of a larger pattern that demanded scrutiny. A courier arrived without announcement, placing a small envelope on an antique desk. No signature, no stamp, only the faint scent of paper and ink that had traveled through unknown hands. William picked it up with gloved precision. The contents were minimal. A list of names, dates, and locations, cryptic in nature, connected only by a set of initials he did not recognize. But the implication was immediate. The list hinted at movements, meetings, alliances forming outside the protective gaze of the palace. Someone was orchestrating a network, unseen but deliberate, and it reached farther than even he had anticipated. He traced the paper with a fingertip, noting the pressure of the pen strokes, the subtle indentations that suggested the haste of its creation. A calculation began to take shape in his mind. Each anomaly, each whisper, each unusual gesture formed the threads of a pattern, but the final shape remained obscured. He knew instinctively that time was a factor. Waiting too long could allow momentum to build, yet acting too soon risked exposing the strategy of those he sought to understand. Meanwhile, outside, a sequence of events unfolded that seemed mundane but were anything but. Cars with tinted windows appeared repeatedly in the same intersections. Diplomatic aides left meetings early, claiming trivial excuses, yet their absence created ripples in agendas only partially visible to the casual observer. An investment fund shifted enormous sums across multiple international accounts, flagged by algorithms but explained away in public statements as routine adjustments. Everything carried the veneer of normalcy, yet William knew better. Patterns this intricate did not emerge by chance. Inside the palace, subtle signals began to appear among trusted aides. A cough here, a pause there, a deliberately misquoted fact that, when pieced together, revealed a small but significant breach in protocol. William's mind traced these signals like a cartographer, mapping out terrain that was invisible to others. Each observation carried the potential to be either a trap or a guide, and discerning which required an acute awareness honed over years of silent scrutiny. A meeting convened in secrecy, held in a room where walls were thick enough to muffle even the faintest whispers. The participants spoke in indirect references, their words carefully measured, carrying layers of meaning accessible only to those attuned to the subtext. Reports of transactions, private communications, and unexplained shifts in alliances were discussed, each revelation building tension like a tightening coil. One aide presented a subtle anomaly in a charitable donation, initially dismissed as clerical error, but William's intuition recognized its significance immediately. It was a deliberate insertion, an opening, a challenge, a signal to those who were watching. Outside the palace gates, shadows moved with purpose. Couriers, not officially affiliated with known institutions, delivered items, messages, and even digital devices whose presence raised questions no one dared voice aloud. A figure lingered near the river, watching the reflection of bridges, the movements of patrols, recording and vanishing without trace. The city, to most, seemed unchanged. To William, it was an ecosystem of hidden currents, each with its own unpredictable force, each capable of influencing the balance of power with subtle, precise pressure. As he analyzed the incoming information, William began to see a fractal of influence spreading across multiple domains. Economic levers were being shifted in ways that suggested strategic manipulation, political favors redirected subtly, reputations tested and eroded in whispers. Every anomaly reinforced the sense that a vast, interconnected plan was at work, one whose consequences, if unchecked, could ripple outward, touching every corner of influence he held dear. The tension was not merely intellectual. It carried a physical weight that pressed against the edges of the palace's grandeur. Every decision, every movement felt consequential. An aide's hesitation became a puzzle to decode. A single document, innocuous in appearance, became a potential linchpin in unraveling the larger scheme. The stakes were both immediate and vast. Understanding the scope of the hidden network meant the difference between maintaining control and being overtaken by forces that were methodical, patient, and invisible. Even the media, ever present yet oblivious to the true currents beneath, began to signal small tremors. Articles surfaced questioning alliances without overt accusation. Financial columns noted inexplicable shifts in investment without attribution. To the public, it seemed like coincidence. To William, it was a confirmation, echoes of the unseen hand that moved behind the scenes, shaping events to a rhythm only a few could detect. As evening descended, the palace seemed to exhale a collective breath. The fog outside thickened once more, mirroring the complexity and obscurity of the forces at play. William paused before a window, watching the glow of lanterns along the river and the silhouettes of bridges cutting through the mist. He knew that each move he considered now would set in motion reactions far beyond his immediate view. The chessboard was no longer static. It was alive, shifting with a precision and intent that demanded vigilance. And beneath it all, the unanswered questions hung heavy. Who orchestrated this network? What was the ultimate goal? How many layers of deception were yet undiscovered? The palace, magnificent and imposing, was no longer merely a residence. It was a frontline, a silent witness to the first tremors of a battle whose outcome remained uncertain. In that quiet, tension-laden twilight, one thought crystallized. The calm was over. Every signal, every anomaly, every shadowed movement pointed to the same truth. The storm was no longer approaching. It had begun, invisible to most, but unavoidable. And those who understood, like William, would have to navigate it with clarity, patience, and the readiness to act when the right moment arrived. The palace seemed almost alive with quiet urgency, its walls absorbing whispered instructions and secret movements like the pages of a confidential ledger. William paced a corridor lined with portraits of ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow him, judging his decisions even as he grappled with forces he could not fully see. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat, a reminder that the stakes were rising, that inaction carried consequences as lethal as any direct assault. A coded message arrived in the late hours, slipped beneath the door of a side chamber no one but a few trusted aides had reason to enter. The handwriting was precise, almost meticulous, yet deliberately irregular in spacing and punctuation. Each anomaly in the script suggested urgency, warning, and perhaps even a subtle taunt. William traced the words with a gloved finger, deciphering the hidden sequence of instructions embedded within. The message implied a meeting, a shift in alliances, a point of contact who could reveal truths that might either stabilize the unraveling network or accelerate its chaos. The city outside was obscured by a dense fog that blurred streetlights and turned cobblestones into liquid silver. Shadows moved with purpose, slipping through the mist like living smoke, indistinct yet deliberate. Vehicles with untraceable plates glided silently past patrols, their occupants unknown, their intent unknowable. Somewhere, someone watched, recording, cataloging, orchestrating with patience that bordered on obsession. It was a reminder that the danger was not merely hypothetical. It was immediate, woven into the rhythm of the city itself. Inside, the palace's inner circle convened in a private chamber. Maps, financial ledgers, and diplomatic communications were laid out, each artifact a fragment of the larger puzzle. William examined them meticulously, noting subtle discrepancies in dates, locations, and reported interactions. One aide mentioned an innocuous meeting between high-ranking diplomats, an event dismissed publicly as routine, but the timing and context suggested coordination beyond casual coincidence. Someone was leveraging trust as a weapon, and every misstep could tip the balance toward disaster. A phone rang quietly, a single sharp note cutting through the otherwise hushed room. The line was brief, the voice clipped and measured, offering only hints: a shipment, a meeting, a delayed confirmation. but in that brevity lay volumes. William's mind parsed each word, each inflection, constructing a mental map of intentions, contingencies, and the hidden architecture of influence. He knew the network he was unraveling was not simply political. It was financial, social, and psychological, stretching across borders and hierarchies with precision that almost mocked the uninitiated. The tension escalated further when surveillance reports indicated unusual activity near critical infrastructure. Cameras detected vehicles lingering near bridges and tunnels, patrol routes subtly altered without official explanation. Each anomaly seemed trivial in isolation, yet together they formed a pattern of deliberate preparation. Someone was planning, coordinating, testing reactions. The realization hit. This was no longer simply a network of influence. It was a campaign, silent and invisible, but capable of tangible impact if unchecked. Meanwhile, inside the palace, subtle betrayals began to surface. A trusted aide displayed a hesitation, a brief flicker of discomfort when asked about routine reports. Another misquoted a directive, then corrected it too quickly, almost as if aware of the implications of their own words. William noticed, cataloged, and stored each incident, knowing that one overlooked signal could unravel months of precaution. The palace was both fortress and labyrinth, and he had to navigate it without alerting those whose loyalties were uncertain. At nightfall, the city beyond seemed to contract, fog swallowing streets, lanterns flickering against the mist. A shadowy figure appeared on a bridge, pausing to observe the flow of traffic, recording the movement of vehicles and individuals with an almost ritualistic precision. It was a reminder that while the palace offered control, the real world was governed by invisible hands, each capable of shifting events with minimal effort but maximum effect. Back within the walls, William reviewed intercepted communications and financial anomalies, piecing together sequences that hinted at clandestine transfers and manipulated information streams. Each discovery revealed a new layer of complexity. Alliances formed in secrecy, funds redirected under the guise of routine adjustments, reputations subtly undermined through whispers and innuendo. The deeper he dug, the more it became clear. Those orchestrating the network understood influence as a weapon as much as any army might wield a sword. By midnight, the palace seemed suspended in a tense equilibrium, the air thick with anticipation. William stood before a window, observing the fog-shrouded city below, each reflection of lamplight a silent witness to unseen maneuvers. He understood that the next move would be critical. Act too soon, and the network could retreat and regroup. Wait too long, and the repercussions could cascade uncontrollably. The balance was delicate, the strategy perilous, and yet the path forward demanded clarity and resolve. And beneath all calculations, the ever-present question remained, echoing louder with every passing hour. Who truly controlled the game? Which players were acting independently, and which were orchestrated pieces in a larger design? The answers were buried beneath layers of deception, but finding them was no longer optional. The palace, magnificent yet vulnerable, stood at the threshold of revelation, and the storm that had been building for months was about to make landfall in ways no one had yet imagined. The night had deepened into something almost tangible. A velvet darkness pressed against the palace walls, the faint hum of distant traffic muffled by the weight of anticipation. William moved silently through the private corridors, every step deliberate, aware that the culmination of months of secrecy, subterfuge, and hidden maneuvering had converged into this single, fragile moment. Outside, the fog had thickened into an almost opaque shroud, turning the city into a dreamscape of shifting lights and indistinct shadows. Every lantern reflected 1,000 possibilities, each one a potential trap, a miscalculation, a revelation waiting to strike. Inside the war room, the assembled aides and advisors were tense but focused, their eyes darting from maps to documents, from encrypted communications to surveillance footage. Each piece of intelligence carried with it weight, a clue to the larger pattern, a step closer to unraveling the network that had so subtly infiltrated every level of influence. Financial irregularities, clandestine alliances, and subtle manipulations. The web had been intricate, almost elegant in its design. But now it was exposed, layer by layer, under the precise scrutiny of a mind unwilling to be deceived. A sudden alert pierced the room, a soft, insistent chime that set nerves on edge. It was the final sequence, a meeting location confirmed, a vehicle route mapped, an exchange poised to occur. The network had been planning a decisive move, unaware that William had anticipated every contingency. He studied the information carefully, noting the timing, the signals, the small inconsistencies that marked human error even in the most disciplined operatives. This was the moment where patience intersected with action, where preparation would either triumph or collapse under the weight of unforeseen consequences. William's gaze lingered on the city beyond the palace windows. The fog seemed to pulse with life, shadows coalescing into shapes that hinted at unseen observers, silent agents threading through streets and alleys. Somewhere in that obscured expanse, the final pieces of the conspiracy were moving into position. And yet, for the first time, William felt the subtle shift of advantage. The meticulous strategy, the cataloging of every irregularity, had brought him closer to control than ever before. A secure line buzzed, carrying a voice that was at once urgent and measured. The transfer is in motion, but they suspect nothing yet. Each word, each inflection, confirmed suspicions, revealed intentions, and hinted at the vulnerabilities the network had failed to protect. William noted the timing, the channels, the coded redundancies embedded in the communication. He understood that the final confrontation was as much about psychological leverage as it was about action, and the balance of fear, knowledge, and anticipation would determine the outcome. Preparations accelerated. Advisors coordinated movements with precision, officers positioned discreetly, analysts double-checked intercepted communications. Every variable was accounted for, every risk calculated. Yet even in this orchestration, the human element persisted. Hesitation, loyalty, curiosity, and fear, all capable of tipping the scales in unpredictable ways. William moved among them, a calm center in the eye of a storm that had been building for months, radiating clarity in a sea of tension. As the hour approached, the palace itself seemed to hold its breath. The fog outside thickened further, muting sounds, distorting light, creating the illusion of isolation even in the heart of a city teeming with life. Then, from the shadows, signals began to emerge, the first confirmations, subtle indications that the network was executing its final maneuver. William's team responded with synchronized precision. Blocks, diversions, interventions, each one designed to neutralize threats without alerting the wider network. It was a dance of anticipation and reaction, each movement measured to exploit the smallest advantage. At the critical moment, the pieces converged. A convoy was intercepted, communications rerouted, key operatives detained before they could act. Financial streams were frozen, misinformation corrected before it could spread, alliances fractured as hidden loyalties surfaced under the pressure of exposure. Every element that had threatened to destabilize power was neutralized not with brute force, but with knowledge, timing, and the subtle application of leverage. And then came the quiet revelation. The mastermind, the unseen hand orchestrating the network, had been visible all along in the patterns, the inconsistencies, the signals no one else had noticed. Confrontation was not a violent one. It was strategic, psychological, the unveiling of truth in such a way that the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The network, intricate and insidious, unraveled in a sequence as inevitable as it was precise. Each thread pulled, exposing another, until what had seemed invincible became fragile and transparent. As dawn approached, the fog began to lift, revealing a city that looked unchanged yet had been fundamentally altered. Within the palace, William surveyed the outcome. Control restored, conspiracies neutralized, threats contained. But the resolution carried its own weight. The revelations had exposed vulnerabilities, hinted at lingering shadows, and left questions whose answers would continue to shape decisions long after this moment. Victory was measured not only in the neutralization of the network, but in the awareness that vigilance must continue, that the patterns of deception could never be fully erased. In the quiet aftermath, William stood once more at the window, watching the city awaken. The streets were calm, yet he knew the fog would return, metaphorically if not literally, carrying new possibilities, new threats, new designs. And somewhere in that unending web of influence and power, curiosity remained, suspense lingered, and the story, ever ongoing, prepared its next chapter. The night's storm had passed, but the game, eternal and intricate, continued. A reminder that understanding, strategy, and awareness were the true weapons in the shadows of power.